Expensive champagne lingered on my lips before the world went dark. I woke up to black water slapping against a yacht that should not have been empty. The GPS was smashed. The radio wires were cut. My family thought they had erased me, leaving me to drift too far from shore to scream. They forgot that a ghost has nothing left to lose. The gift I sent back was not forgiveness. It was a receipt. My name is Piper Holmes, and I am 29 years old. That was the first fact I had to retrieve from the black fog swirling inside my skull. It felt like someone had driven a railroad spike through my temple. My tongue was swollen, coated in a chemical bitterness that definitely was not the aftertaste of the vintage Dom Perignon we had been drinking. I was lying on the teak decking of the Morrowind, face pressed against the wood, smelling varnish and salt spray. I tried to push myself up, but my arms felt like they belonged to someone else. They were heavy, unresponsive things. I retched, dry and painful, my stomach convulsing around nothing. I rolled onto my back, gasping for air that felt too thick, too humid. Above me, the sky was not the clear, star-studded canvas of the calm evening I remembered. It was a low, bruising gray, churning with the promise of violence. "Dad?" I croaked. The sound was pathetic, a scratchy whisper that the wind snatched away immediately. I waited for an answer. I waited for the heavy tread of my father. Graham, or the sharp, clicking heels of my sister. Sloane. I waited for Ethan's voice, that smooth baritone that had promised to take care of me just hours ago. Silence. Not the silence of a sleeping vessel. This was the silence of a tomb. The only sounds were the slap of water against the fiberglass hull and the rhythmic creaking of the rigging. I forced myself to my knees. The world tilted violently. The horizon was pitching up and down. We were drifting. The engines were off. That was wrong. The Morrowind never drifted. My father was obsessive about the stabilizers. "Sloane? Ethan?" I yelled louder this time, panic lending me a surge of adrenaline that cut through the drug-induced haze. I stumbled toward the main salon. The glass sliding doors were open, sliding back and forth on their track with the motion of the waves, banging against the frame. Thud, slide, thud. Inside, the remnants of our celebration were still there. The crystal flutes were overturned on the mahogany table. A half-eaten tray of oysters sat warming in the humidity, smelling foul. A napkin with a lipstick stain, Sloane's signature crimson, lay crumpled on the floor. It looked like a party that had been interrupted by the end of the world. I checked the master's stateroom. Empty. The bed was made, the sheets crisp and undisturbed. I checked the guest cabins. Empty. I checked the head. Empty. A cold knot tightened in my gut. I ran back up the stairs to the flybridge, my bare feet slipping on the damp steps. "Ethan!" I screamed his name, hoping he was just up top, maybe fixing something, maybe checking the view. The flybridge was deserted, but it was not just empty, it had been sanitized. I stared at the helm, and the breath left my lungs in a rush. The console was a ruin. The glass screen of the GPS navigation system had been shattered. It looked like someone had taken a hammer to it, over and over again, until it was nothing but a spiderweb of cracks and black voids. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and touched the jagged glass. It was not an accident. You do not accidentally destroy a $20,000 navigation system. I jammed my hand into the ignition cubby. The keys were gone, not just removed, but the entire ignition barrel looked like it had been tampered with. Gouged deep. I lunged for the VHF radio handset. The cord dangled uselessly. It had been sliced clean through, the copper wires glinting in the dull light. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." I scrambled to the aft deck, leaning over the rail to look at the swim platform. The hydraulic lift was down. The tender, our 20-foot escape rib, was gone. The chocks were empty. They were gone, all of them. I stood there, gripping the cold steel rail, shivering in a cocktail dress that cost more than most people's cars. And I looked out at the water. It was endless, a wall of slate-gray ocean in every direction. No land, no lights, no other ships, just the indifferent, heaving Atlantic. I stumbled back to the salon, my legs giving out, and collapsed onto the leather sofa. I stared at the spilled wine on the table, a dark red stain, soaking into the expensive rug. Memory flashed, sharp and jagged, Graham raising his glass. To family, Piper, we have been hard on you, but tonight is a new start. Sloane smiling, that tight, predatory smile she used when she won a negotiation. Drink up, little sister. You look tense. Ethan, my Ethan, handing me the glass. His eyes were not meeting mine. He was looking at my father. It is the good stuff. Piper, special blend. The taste. That was it. The champagne had tasted metallic. I had made a face, and Sloane had laughed. A high, tinkling sound that now echoed in my head like a knife scraping against bone. She laughed because she knew. I grabbed a bottle of water from the bar and downed it, trying to wash the poison out of my system. I threw the bottle across the room. It bounced harmlessly off the wall. This was not a mistake. They did not get drunk and accidentally leave me behind. You do not accidentally smash a GPS. You do not accidentally cut a radio wire. You do not accidentally take the only lifeboat. This was an execution. The realization hit me harder than the physical nausea. My father, my sister, the man I was supposed to marry, they had planned this. They had sat around a table, perhaps in the boardroom at Larkspur Harbor Group, and discussed the logistics of my murder. How do we get rid of her? The ocean. Make it look like an accident. She fell overboard. So tragic, so sad. I felt a scream building in my chest, a primal thing that wanted to tear my throat open, but I swallowed it down. Screaming would burn oxygen. Screaming would burn energy, and I needed every ounce of energy I had. I looked at the sky again. The clouds were banking higher, a wall of charcoal bruising the horizon. The wind was picking up. Whistling through the empty radar arch, the boat was listing slightly to port, without the engines running. The Morrowind was at the mercy of the current, and the current out here was strong. I needed to know where I was. I patted my wrist. My watch. Thank God for my paranoia. Or maybe just my defiance. Sloane had told me to take it off, said it looked clunky with my dress. I had kept it on. A heavy stainless steel diver's watch, waterproof to 300 meters. It was still ticking. I looked at the dial. It was 3 in the afternoon. The last thing I remembered was dinner at 8. That was 19 hours ago. 19 hours? The Morrowind cruised at roughly 20 knots. If we had left the marina at 5, and they had kept heading east until I passed out. I closed my eyes, doing the math that I had always been good at, the math that made me a boring CPA and not a glittering socialite like Sloane. If they ran the boat for 4 hours, that put us 80 miles out. If they disabled the engines and left immediately in the tender, which could do 30 knots, they would be back on shore by now. They would be calling the Coast Guard right now, putting on their worried faces. She is missing. We woke up and she was gone. But 19 hours of drifting. The Gulf Stream pushed north-northeast at about 4 knots. I scrambled to the chart table, praying they had left the paper charts. The drawer was locked. Of course it was. I looked around for a tool. A heavy brass statue of a dolphin sat on the shelf, a hideous gift from one of Graham's business partners. I grabbed it and smashed the lock. Wood splintered. I yanked the drawer open. The charts were there. I spread the map of the North Atlantic out on the table, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the pencil I found rolling in the back of the drawer. If my calculations were right, I was not just offshore. I was deep in the shipping dead zone. They had taken me past the continental shelf, out where the water turned from blue to black, where the depth dropped to thousands of feet, and the storm, that line of gray on the horizon was a frontal system. I had seen the weather report before we left. It was supposed to miss the coast, but out here I was right in its path. My knees gave way again, and I slid down to the floor, clutching the map. Why? The question circled in my brain. Why kill me? I was the quiet one. I stayed out of their way. I signed the papers they put in front of me. I let Sloane have the spotlight. I let Graham play the tycoon. Then I remembered the date. Today was October 12th. My birthday was October 16th. 4 days. In 4 days, I would turn 30. Grandmother's trust. The sheer magnitude of it crashed into me. $48 million. And, more importantly, the controlling voting shares of Larkspur Harbor Group. When I was 25, Graham had laughed about the trust. He said he was managing it for me. He said I did not need to worry about the complexities of port logistics and union contracts. But the terms were ironclad. On my 30th birthday, the trusteeship dissolved. Absolute control transferred to Piper Homes, unless the beneficiary is deceased or incapacitated, or missing. If I was missing, presumed dead. The control reverted to the next of kin. Graham, and then Sloan. They did not just want me out of the way, they needed me erased. And they needed it to happen before the 16th. A wave slapped the side of the hull, harder this time, sending a spray of water over the gunwale. The boat shuddered. The sky was darkening rapidly. The wind was beginning to howl, a low, mournful sound that vibrated through the fiberglass. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the sliding door. My hair was matted, my makeup smeared, my dress torn at the hem. I looked like a ghost. Maybe I was a ghost. To them, I was already dead. They were probably raising a glass to my memory right now, wiping away fake tears while they mentally spent my inheritance. A surge of heat rose up in me, burning away the cold terror. It was not hope. Hope was flimsy. This was rage. Pure, distilled rage. I stood up. I wiped the smudged mascara from under my eyes. I steadied myself against the chart table as the floor pitched beneath me. "You made a mistake, Graham," I said to the empty room. My voice was raspy, but it was steady. They thought they had left a helpless girl to drown. They thought Piper, the boring accountant, the one who got seasick, the one who never fought back, would just curl up and die. They forgot that I was the one who balanced their books. I was the one who found the errors. I was the one who fixed the mess they made. I looked at the horizon, where the storm was building into a wall of black fury. "If you want me dead," I hissed, "you are going to have to come out here and finish it yourself." I had 4 days. 4 days to survive the ocean. 4 days to survive a storm without power or navigation. 4 days to keep my heart beating just to spite them. I turned away from the glass and headed toward the galley. I needed inventory. I needed water. I needed to see what else they had broken. I was not Piper Holmes, the victim, not anymore. I was a loose end they had failed to cut, and I was going to live. To understand why I am currently clinging to a fiberglass ledge in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, waiting for a storm to swallow me whole, you have to understand the specific, icy architecture of the Holmes family. Most families are built on blood or loyalty, or perhaps just shared trauma. My family was built on the quarterly earnings report. My father, Graham Holmes, is a man who lives his life as if he is a walking, breathing board of directors. He does not have relationships. He has transactions. If you are profitable to him, you are family. If you are a liability, you are a line item to be redacted. I grew up watching him calculate the ROI of a birthday party before he would agree to pay for the cake. He is a handsome man in that silver fox, country club way, always tanned, always wearing a suit that costs more than a mid-level employee makes in a year. But his eyes are dead. They are calculators that never stop running the numbers. Then there is my sister, Sloan. If Graham is the cold, hard cash, Sloan is the inflation that eats it alive. She is 2 years older than me and has never worked a day in her life. Unless you count managing her social calendar as a career, which she frequently reminds everyone is exhausting work. Sloan is the princess of every room she walks into. She is vibrant, loud, and charming in a way that makes you want to lean in, right up until the moment you realize she has picked your pocket. She is a black hole for capital. She burns through liquidity faster than any failed venture capital project my father ever touched. And then there is me, Piper, the mistake, the boring one. I am a certified public accountant. I like spreadsheets. I like the clean, undeniable truth of numbers. Numbers do not lie to you. They do not say they love you and then push you off a boat. They just sit there, waiting to be balanced. In a family of sharks and peacocks, I was the beige wallpaper. I thought my lack of ambition was my shield. I thought that by staying out of the spotlight, by refusing to engage in their power struggles, I was safe. I was naive. I forgot the most basic rule of accounting. Even a zero on a balance sheet can be dangerous if it is in the wrong column. The trouble started 3 years ago when my grandmother, Beatrice Holmes, died. Beatrice was the iron fist inside the velvet glove of the Larkspur Harbor Group. She built the empire, the private docks, the shipping logistics, the heavy freight transport. From a single fishing vessel, everyone assumed she would leave the keys to the kingdom to Graham. He was her only son. He had been acting CEO for a decade, but Beatrice knew something that I only just figured out. She knew Graham was reckless. She knew he leveraged assets to feed his ego, and she knew Sloane was a financial parasite. So she dropped a nuclear bomb in the form of a last will and testament. She created a generation-skipping trust. It was a masterpiece of legal binding. The principal sum was $48 million, plus the controlling voting shares of Larkspur Harbor Group. The beneficiary was not Graham, it was me. But there was a catch. Beatrice was old-fashioned. She wanted to ensure I was mature enough to handle the weight of the crown. So she placed a lock on the trust. Until I turned 30, the trust was managed by a board of trustees, and I received only a modest stipend. On my 30th birthday, the trust would dissolve into my direct ownership. I would become the majority shareholder. I would have the power to fire my father. I would have the power to cut off Sloane's allowance. However, the lawyers included a standard survivorship clause, the kind you gloss over because you never think it will apply to you. If the primary beneficiary dies, or is declared missing and presumed dead, before the vesting date, my 30th birthday, the trust does not dissolve. Instead, it reverts to the next of kin, Graham and Sloane. For 3 years, they played it cool. They treated me with a distant, polite indifference. I worked my job at a mid-sized accounting firm. Far away from the Larkspur offices, I drove a sedan. I lived in a condo I paid for myself. I thought we had reached a detente. Then came the reconciliation, 2 weeks ago. Graham called me. His voice cracked with an emotion that sounded suspiciously like regret. He told me he was getting old. He told me he looked at our family photos and realized he did not know his youngest daughter. He said he wanted to fix it before my big 3-0. Just one night. Piper, he had said. A pre-birthday dinner. Just us. On the Morrowind. We will sail out, watch the sunset, pop a few bottles, and just be a family. No business, no lawyers, just us. I hesitated, but then Ethan squeezed my hand. Ethan Vale, my fiancé. The man with the soft eyes and the voice that could talk me down from a panic attack. We had been together for 2 years. He was an architect, struggling but passionate. He was the one thing in my life that felt purely mine, untouched by the Holmes dysfunction, or so I thought. You should go, honey, Ethan had whispered, kissing my forehead. He is trying, and it is your 30th. Maybe he wants to hand over the reins gracefully. Give him a chance. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that my father looked at me and saw a daughter, not a hostile takeover waiting to happen. I wanted to believe that Sloane's sudden texts about sister bonding were real. God, I was stupid. I see the ledger clearly now. I see the liabilities column where my life used to be. Ethan was not just a supportive partner, I know now. Thinking back on the hushed phone calls and the way he would sweat when the mail came, that he was drowning. He was a man who liked the high life, but did not have the talent to pay for it. I suspect gambling debts, or perhaps a failed investment he hid from me. It does not matter what the debt was. What matters is that Graham bought it. My father likely paid off Ethan's bookie or his bank, and in exchange, he bought the access code to my heart. The dinner on the boat was a masterclass in theater. I remember sitting at the stern table as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. Graham was pouring a vintage Cabernet Sauvignon, a bottle that cost more than my mortgage payment. "To Piper," Graham said, raising his glass. The crystal caught the dying light. "To the future. May it be everything we deserve." I drank to that. I drank to the future. I did not realize he was toasting to a future where I did not exist. Sloane was unusually tactile. She touched my arm, fixed my hair. "You know, Piper," she said, her voice slurring slightly with the wine, "I used to be jealous of you. Grandmother always liked you best. But now I think things are finally going to be fair." I thought she meant fair because I was finally getting the inheritance. I thought she was accepting her lot. I smiled at her. "We will figure it out. Sloane, I'm not going to leave you out in the cold." She laughed then, that sharp, jagged laugh. "Oh, I know you won't, sweetie. I know." The pieces fit together with a sickening click. The timeline was the key. If I died after I turned 30, the money would go to my estate. It would go to Ethan, if we were married, or to charities I had designated in my own will. Graham and Sloane would get nothing, but if I died before I turned 30, the trust terms dictated the reversion. Today is October 12th. My birthday is October 16th. They had a 4-day window, a narrow closing door. They could not wait for cancer or a car accident. They needed a guarantee, and they needed it to happen in a way that left no body. No autopsy, no questions. The ocean is the perfect accomplice. It eats evidence. If I simply vanished from a yacht in the middle of the Atlantic, the narrative writes itself. Tragic accident. She had too much to drink. She slipped. It was dark. We searched, but the sea was too rough. They would cry on the news. Graham would wear a black suit and talk about the crushing weight of loss. Sloane would post a montage of us as children on Instagram with a heartbroken caption. Ethan would play the devastated fiancé, too distraught to speak. While secretly cashing the check my father wrote him, they would push for an expedited declaration of death. They would cite the dangerous waters, the storm, the lack of survival gear. They would have a judge sign the paper before the candles on my birthday cake could have even been lit. And then, on the morning of October 16th, the $48 million and the Larkspur Empire would quietly, legally, transfer to Graham Holmes. It was not a crime of passion. It was a business merger. They merged their interests to liquidate the one asset standing in their way. Me. I sat there in the dark salon of the drifting boat, the rage burning hot enough to dry the dampness on my skin. I thought about the gift Graham had mentioned earlier in the night. "I have a gift for you, Piper," he had said, patting his jacket pocket. "But let's wait until we are further out. I want it to be a surprise." The surprise was not in his pocket. The surprise was the empty ocean. The surprise was the silence where my family should have been. I looked at the smashed GPS again. I looked at the cut wires. They did not just want me dead. They wanted me to be erased. They stripped the boat of its identity just as they planned to strip me of mine. They assumed that a CPA who gets seasick and prefers quiet nights in would panic. They banked on me curling into a ball and crying until the hypothermia or the waves took me. They forgot one thing. I am an accountant. I spend my life looking for discrepancies. I spend my life fixing broken systems. Graham thinks he balanced the equation. He thinks Piper minus life equals profit, but he forgot to account for the variable of human will. He forgot that I am his daughter, too. I share his blood, even if I hate it. I have his stubbornness. I have his capacity for cold, hard calculation. He turned me into a number. He made me a statistic, but he failed to close the file. I stood up, my legs steadying against the roll of the boat. The nausea was gone, replaced by a clarity as sharp as a diamond. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of a death certificate. I was going to give them an audit, and this audit was going to cost them everything. "Happy early birthday to me," I whispered to the empty room. I turned away from the luxury prison they had left me in and headed toward the engine room access panel. They might have taken the keys. They might have smashed the navigation, but they left the boat, and a boat is just a machine. Machines follow rules. If they wanted the money, they were going to have to explain where the body was. And if there was no body, there was no payout. I was going to stay alive, not just for survival, but out of spite. Pure, unadulterated, $48 million spite. Panic is a luxury. That was the first thought that crystallized in my mind as I stood in the swaying salon. Panic takes energy. It takes oxygen. And right now, out here in the gray expanse of the Atlantic, I had a limited supply of both. I forced myself to breathe. In for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out for 4. The nausea was still there, a oily snake coiling in my stomach, aggravated by the rolling motion of the dead ship. I grabbed another bottle of water from the bar, chugging it down despite the protest of my gut. Dehydration would kill me faster than the cold. I rummaged through the first aid kit under the sink, one of the few things they had not bothered to empty, and found a blister pack of Dramamine. I dry swallowed 2 pills. They would take 20 minutes to kick in. I just had to hold it together until then. I needed situational awareness. I staggered out to the aft deck, wrapping my arm around a cleat to steady myself against the lurching horizon. The wind was picking up, whipping my hair across my face in stinging lashes. I looked at the water. The current was dragging the stern around, pushing us north-northeast. The waves were not huge yet, maybe 4 or 5 feet, but they were choppy, confused. The storm front I had seen earlier was no longer a distant threat. It was a wall of charcoal clouds consuming the sky. Maybe 2 hours out. We were dead in the water. A boat without propulsion in a storm is just a coffin with a view. I needed power. I turned and looked at the hatch in the cockpit floor, the engine room. My family thought I spent my summers in college finding myself or doing quaint little internships. That was the narrative Sloan sold at parties. The truth was, I worked. I worked because I hated the suffocating silence of our summer estate. I hated the way the staff looked at us, half fear and half contempt. So I went down to the commercial docks in Larkspur Harbor. I worked the front desk at a diesel repair shop for 2 summers. I made coffee, I filed invoices, and when the shop was quiet, I watched the mechanics. I liked the mechanics. They were honest. If an engine was broken, it was broken. You could not bribe a fuel injector. You could not charm a blown gasket. I learned things by osmosis. I learned that a diesel engine needs 3 things to run: fuel, air, and compression. It does not need electricity to run, only to start. I lifted the heavy hatch cover. The smell hit me instantly. Hot oil, unburnt diesel, and the rubbery scent of hoses. It was the smell of the only place I had ever felt useful. I climbed down the ladder into the darkness. The emergency DC lights were out, another sabotaged system, so I had to rely on the weak gray light filtering down from the hatch. The Morrowind was powered by twin heavy-duty marine diesels. They were massive blocks of iron, painted white, silent beasts sleeping in the dark. I moved to the starboard engine first. I traced the fuel lines. The valves were open. Good. They had not drained the tanks. That would have taken too long. I checked the sea strainers. Clear. Then I looked at the electrical panel mounted on the forward bulkhead. It was a mess. The main breaker for the starter motors had been smashed. The plastic housing was shattered, and the thick copper cables had been yanked out. But it was the ignition wiring that made my heart sink. They had taken a pair of wire cutters to the harness leading to the starter solenoids. A dozen colored wires dangled uselessly, their copper ends gleaming in the gloom. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, Piper, think." They had disabled the key ignition. They had cut the control lines. But the starter motor itself, the heavy cylindrical unit bolted to the side of the engine, looked intact. A starter motor is just an electric motor. If you give it 12 or 24 volts from the battery, it spins. It engages the flywheel. The engine turns. Compression builds. Fuel injects. Bang. I needed to bypass the entire ruined dashboard. I needed to hotwire a $2 million yacht like a stolen sedan. I scrambled back up the ladder to the galley. I tore through the junk drawer. I needed something sharp and something conductive. I found a serrated steak knife and a heavy-duty pair of grilling tongs. It was ridiculous. It was absurd. But it was all I had. Back in the engine room, the heat was suffocating. I moved to the battery bank. These were massive AGM batteries, heavy as lead bricks. I checked the terminals. They were still connected. Thank God. They had been too lazy to unbolt the leads. I traced the thick positive cable from the battery to the starter motor. That was the main power feed. It was thick as my thumb and still connected. That meant the starter had power sitting right at its door, waiting to be let in. The problem was the solenoid, the switch that told the power to go. I needed a jumper wire. I looked around the bilge. There was a toolbox strapped to the wall. I opened it. Empty. Of course. Graham would not leave me a screwdriver. But in the bottom, caught in the grease, was a length of spare bonding wire, green insulation, maybe 10 gauge. Perfect, I hissed. I used the steak knife to strip the ends of the green wire. My hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from the sheer physical exertion of balancing in a rocking engine room. The boat pitched violently to port, and I slammed my shoulder against the hot engine block. I bit my tongue, tasting copper, but I did not drop the wire. I crawled over the engine mount, squeezing myself into the narrow space between the hull and the motor. I found the starter solenoid. It had 2 small terminals and 2 large ones. I remembered old Sal, the head mechanic at the shop, pointing with a grease-stained finger. You short the small terminal to the big positive one. It wakes the beast up. But watch your hands. Piper. She bites. I took a deep breath. I wrapped one end of my green wire around the positive terminal of the solenoid. I held the other end in my hand. Please, I whispered. Please don't be dead. I touched the wire to the S terminal. Click. Nothing. Just a hollow click. My heart stopped. The batteries. Had they drained the batteries? I tried again, grinding the wire against the metal to get a better contact. Click, whir, a slow groan. The engine turned over once, sluggish, tired. Come on! I yelled, my voice echoing in the steel chamber. Wake up! I jammed the wire hard against the terminal and held it there. Whir, 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 roar. The starboard engine caught. A cloud of black smoke coughed out of the exhaust, and then the steady, rhythmic thrum of 700 horsepower filled the room. The vibration traveled up through the floorboards, through the soles of my feet, and into my bones. I slumped back against the hull, laughing. It was a jagged, ugly sound. I laughed until I choked on the diesel fumes. I had done it. I had bypassed their sabotage. I had bypassed their expensive, calculated attempt to murder me with a piece of scrap wire and a steak knife. I repeated the process on the port engine. It caught faster, eager to join its twin. With both engines idling, the lights in the room flickered and then steadied as the alternators kicked in. The darkness retreated. I climbed out of the engine room, my dress smeared with grease, my hands black with soot. I felt like a warrior returning from the underworld. I ran to the lower helm station in the salon. The dashboard was still a smashed ruin. No GPS, no chart plotter, no radio, but the analog gauges, the tachometers, the oil pressure, the temperature, were working. They were simple mechanical linkages. They told me the hearts of the ship were beating. I grabbed the stainless steel wheel. It was cold and solid. I shifted the throttles into gear. The transmission clunked reassuringly, and the Morrowind responded. The bow came around, cutting into the waves instead of rolling helplessly in the trough. I steered us east first, just to clear the immediate drift, then swung the compass heading toward 270 degrees, west, toward land. But as I turned, the boat shuddered. A massive wave, larger than anything before, smashed over the bow. The blue water turned white as it hit the glass of the windshield. The sky outside had gone from gray to a bruised purple-black. The storm had arrived. The Dramamine was trying to work, but the violence of the motion was overwhelming. The horizon was pitching 30 degrees up, then 30 degrees down. I could feel the bile rising in my throat. I could not leave the wheel. If I let go, the boat would turn broadside to the waves, and we would roll over. Capsizing in a storm like this was a death sentence. Engines or not. I found a length of nylon docking line in the side pocket of the helm seat. I wrapped it around my waist and tied myself to the base of the captain's chair, a crude safety harness. "You want to drown me?" I screamed at the windshield, at the storm, at my father. "You have to try harder than that." I steered into the swells, playing the throttles, easing off as we crested and powering up as we slid down the face. It was exhausting. My arms burned. My eyes stung from the salt spray leaking through the door seals. I needed help. I needed a signal, even if I got close to shore. In this weather, I could crash onto the rocks before I saw them. Then I remembered the emergency locker. It was a hidden compartment in the pantry, behind a false panel in the spice rack. My father was paranoid about piracy when we sailed in the Caribbean years ago. He had installed a secret cache for a satellite phone and an EPIRB, an emergency position indicating radio beacon. If the EPIRB was there, I could activate it. It would send a distress signal to a satellite, alerting the Coast Guard with my exact coordinates. They would have to come. They would find me. I waited for a lull in the waves. I engaged the autopilot, hoping the hydraulic pump for the steering was still functional. It held the course, though the wheel twitched nervously. I untied my lashings and stumbled toward the galley. The boat dropped out from under me as we went over a wave, and I slammed my hip against the granite counter. I cried out, biting my lip until it bled. But I kept moving. I reached the spice rack. I clawed at the false panel, ripping it away. My heart soared. The orange plastic case of the EPIRB was there. I grabbed it. It felt light. Too light. I flipped it over. The battery compartment cover was missing. The cavity where the heavy lithium battery pack should have been was empty. I threw the useless plastic shell across the room. It clattered against the oven. They had been thorough. Graham, or the professionals he hired, had thought of everything. No GPS, no radio, no beacon. I reached back into the hole, my fingers searching for anything else. The satellite phone was gone. The flare gun. My fingers closed around cold plastic. The flare gun case. I pulled it out. It was a heavy, orange pistol. I opened the breech. It was loaded. A single, red meteor flare. I checked the box. No spare shells. Just the one in the chamber. One shot. I had one shot to signal a passing ship, or to signal the shore if I ever made it that close. I stood there in the pantry, gripping the flare gun, listening to the roar of the ocean outside and the groan of the fiberglass hull. And then I heard it. It was not the wind. It was not the engine. It was a sound coming from the floor beneath my feet, a scrape, like a shoe dragging against wood. I froze. The pantry had a small access hatch in the floor, leading to a dry storage bilge area where we kept bulk wine and canned goods. It was a cramped, dark space. I heard it again, a sharp intake of breath, a sneeze that was violently suppressed. Someone was on the boat. My blood ran cold. Ethan? Had he stayed behind to make sure? Was he down there, waiting for the storm to do the work, and now realizing I had started the engines? Or was it a hitman, a professional my father had paid to ensure the accident was final? I looked at the flare gun in my hand. It was designed to save lives, but a magnesium flare burns at 3,000 degrees. If you shoot someone with it at close range, it does not just burn them, it goes through them. I released the safety catch. I stepped back, aiming the wide muzzle of the flare gun at the floor hatch. "Come out!" I yelled. My voice was steady, cold. "I know you are there." Silence. "I have a flare gun aimed at your face," I said. "I will burn this entire boat down with you inside it. Open the hatch." The handle of the hatch turned slowly. The wood lifted an inch. Then it was pushed open. A hand reached out. A dirty, bruised hand. A head emerged. It was a man, but it was not Ethan, and it did not look like a hitman. He was wearing a suit that had once been expensive, but was now torn and stained with bilge water. His face was a map of violence. One eye swollen shut. A cut on his lip. Blood matted in his hair. He looked like he had gone 10 rounds with a prizefighter and lost every single one. He blinked in the light, shielding his eyes. He looked up at me, and then at the flare gun pointed directly at his chest. He did not look aggressive. He looked terrified. "Don't," he rasped. His voice was dry, like sandpaper rubbing on stone. He coughed, a wet, hacking sound. "Don't shoot." I did not lower the gun. "Who are you? Did Graham send you?" He pulled himself up, sitting on the edge of the hatch, swaying with the motion of the boat. He looked at me with his one good eye, and I saw a strange mixture of pity and resignation. "No," he said. "Graham didn't send me. Graham tried to kill me, too." He took a breath, wincing as if his ribs were broken. "I am Miles," he said. "Miles Carraway. I work in compliance, and I am not one of them anymore. Miss Holmes." I stared at him. Miles Carraway. The name sounded familiar. He was the shadow that followed my father at board meetings, the man with the clipboards, the man who whispered in Graham's ear. "Why are you here?" I asked, my finger tightening on the trigger. "Because I found the insurance writers," he whispered. "And when I told your father I wouldn't sign off on a murder, he decided 2 accidents were better than 1. The boat slammed into another wave, throwing us both off balance. I grabbed the counter, keeping the gun trained on him. "You are going to help me drive this boat," I said. "I don't know how to drive a boat," he admitted. "Then you are going to learn," I said. "Because we are the only 2 people on Earth who know exactly what Graham Holmes did tonight, and I intend to keep it that way." I lowered the flare gun, but only by an inch. The barrel was still aimed squarely at the center of Miles Carraway's ruined chest. The storm outside was hammering the hull with the force of a battering ram. But the silence inside the galley was heavy, pressurized. "Talk," I said, "and make it fast. The waves are getting higher." Miles slumped against the pantry doorframe. He looked like a man who had been put through a shredder. His left eye was swollen shut, a grotesque bulb of purple and black flesh. His suit jacket, usually impeccable, was torn at the shoulder. "Graham," he wheezed, clutching his side. "Your father, he didn't just bring me along to carry his bags. Piper, he brought me to witness the accident. He needed a third party, someone credible, the head of internal compliance." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made me wince. "He wanted me to sign the affidavit," Miles continued. "He had it written up before we even left the dock. Piper Holmes, intoxicated, slipped on the wet deck, tragically lost at sea. He put the pen in my hand after dinner, after you passed out." "And you refused?" I asked, skepticism coating my voice. Miles Carraway was a company man. He was the guy who fired people on Christmas Eve because the calendar dictated it. "I am a lawyer, Piper, not a murderer," Miles said, looking up at me with his one good eye. "I told him I wouldn't do it. I told him he was insane. I told him I would go to the authorities the moment we docked." He touched the side of his head, where the hair was matted with dried blood. That was when he hit me, with the bottle of reserve Cabernet, the heavy glass one. I went down hard. I think he thought he killed me. I heard him tell Ethan to drag me to the stern. "Dump him with her," he said. "2 birds. My grip on the gun tightened. "How are you still here?" "Ethan," Miles said. "He is weak. You know that. He was dragging me, but he was shaking. He was crying. He dropped me near the pantry door when the boat lurched. I rolled. I rolled into the bilge access and locked it from the inside. I passed out. When I woke up, it was quiet. They were gone." I stared at him. It made sense. Graham was arrogant. He would assume a blow to the head was fatal, and Ethan was a coward. He would not check for a pulse if he could avoid it. "We need to move," I said, finally lowering the gun. "The storm is peaking. Can you stand?" "Barely. Good enough," I said. "Get to the salon. Sit on the floor. Do not touch anything unless I tell you to." I helped him up. He was dead weight, smelling of stale wine and fear. We stumbled through the lurching boat to the main cabin. I shoved him onto the rug and took the helm again. The next 3 hours were a blur of adrenaline and mechanics. I fought the Atlantic, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was winning. I steered the Morrowind not toward the main marina in Larkspur, where my father's cronies would be waiting, but north, I headed for Greyhaven. Greyhaven was a dying fishing town about 40 miles up the coast. It was a place of rusted trawlers, dive bars, and fog, the kind of place people like Graham Holmes only saw from the window of a speeding limousine. "Why Greyhaven?" Miles asked from the floor, holding a bag of frozen peas I had thrown at him to his face. "Because there are no cameras at the public dock," I said, my eyes scanning the dark water for channel markers, and because nobody looks for a multi-million-dollar yacht in a graveyard. We limped into the harbor just before dawn. The storm had broken, leaving behind a thick, suffocating mist. I maneuvered the Morrowind into a slip at the far end of the commercial pier. Wedged between a rotting tugboat and a barge full of scrap metal, I cut the engines. The silence that followed was ringing in my ears. "We can't stay on the boat," Miles said. "The harbor master will check the registration by morning." "I know," I said. "Grab your things." "I have nothing," he said. "They took my phone, my wallet." "Check your inside jacket pocket," I said. "Graham is thorough, but he is arrogant. He probably didn't check the liner." Miles checked. He pulled out a slim metallic rectangle. It was not a wallet. It was a portable solid-state hard drive. He looked at it, and a grim smile touched his split lip. "He missed this." "What is it?" "Insurance," Miles said. "I backed up the vessel's local server before dinner. I always do. It is protocol. It has the navigation logs, the engine data, and the CCTV feed." My stomach dropped. "The cameras were recording?" "The bridge and salon cameras are on a closed loop," Miles said. "They overwrite every 24 hours, but I pulled the data before they cut the power." He looked at me, his expression grave. "I have it. Piper, I have the whole thing." We left the boat. I was wearing a mechanic's jumpsuit I had found in the engine room, rolled up at the cuffs, covering my ruined cocktail dress. Miles looked like a vagrant. We walked into the town. I stopped at an ATM inside a 24-hour convenience store. I pulled a card from the lining of my bra. It was a debit card issued by a small online bank, registered to a P.O. box in another state. I had opened it 5 years ago, depositing $200 a month from my paycheck. Just a rainy day fund, a freedom fund. There was $12,000 in the account. I withdrew the daily maximum, $500. We found a motel on the edge of town called the Gull's Rest. The neon sign buzzed with a dying flicker. The lobby smelled of stale cigarette smoke and damp carpet. The clerk, a kid with headphones around his neck, didn't even look up when I put cash on the counter for 2 nights. Room 104. It was hideous. Peeling wallpaper, a bed that sagged in the middle, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. But it had a door that locked. I sat on the edge of the bed. Miles sat at the small, wobbly desk. He plugged the hard drive into the motel's ancient television using a USB adapter he had miraculously kept in his pocket. "Are you sure you want to see this?" Miles asked. His hand hovered over the remote. "Play it," I said. My voice was flat. The screen flickered to life. The image was grainy, black and white infrared, but the faces were clear. It was the aft deck of the Morrowind. The timestamp read 8:45 in the evening. I saw myself. I was slumped in the deck chair, my head lolling to the side. I looked like a rag doll. Then Graham walked into the frame. He was holding his wineglass. He looked at me with an expression of utter distaste, as if I were a stain on his upholstery. "Is she out?" Graham asked. Ethan stepped into view. He looked pale. He touched my shoulder, shook me slightly. "Piper? Piper?" I didn't move on the screen. "She is out," Ethan said. His voice was trembling. "Graham, I don't know if I can do this." "You spent the money, Ethan," Graham said. He took a sip of wine. "You spent the money, and you signed the promissory note. Do you want to go to prison for fraud? Or do you want to be a widower with a very generous settlement?" Ethan looked at me. I watched the man I loved. The man I had planned to build a life with. Weigh my life against his debt. It took him 5 seconds to decide. "Help me lift her," Ethan said. Sloane walked in then. She was smoking a cigarette, something she never did in public. She watched them grab my arms and legs. "Careful with the dress," Sloane said. She flicked ash onto the deck. "It is vintage. Shame to ruin it." "Open the gate," Graham ordered. They dragged me to the side. They didn't even look at my face. They handled me like a sack of garbage. "Make it quick," Graham said. "Don't let her wake up." Then they heaved. My body went over the rail. Splash. Gone. On the screen. Graham dusted off his hands. Sloane checked her reflection in the sliding glass door. Ethan just stood there, staring at the black water. "Done," Graham said. "Now, get Miles. We need the witness." The recording cut to static. The motel room was silent. The only sound was the humming of the mini-fridge. I expected to cry. I expected to scream, to throw the lamp, to break down. That is what a victim does. That is what the old piper would have done. But I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel grief. I felt cold. It was a beautiful, clarifying cold. It started in my chest and spread to my fingertips. It froze the tears before they could form. It froze the heartbreak until it shattered into dust. They had not just killed me. They had dehumanized me. To Sloane, I was a dress to be saved. To Graham, I was a transaction to be closed. To Ethan, I was a debt to be paid. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked at the brick wall. "We should call the FBI," Miles said, his voice shaking. "We have the tape. We can go to the federal building in the city." I turned to look at him. "No. Piper, this is capital murder, attempted murder, conspiracy. If we go to the police," I said, my voice calm, "Graham will know within the hour. He has the local judges in his pocket. He plays golf with the district attorney, even the feds. By the time they process the evidence, Graham will have his lawyers bury us in injunctions. He will claim the tape is doctored. He will claim I am mentally unstable. He has the money to buy the narrative." "So what do we do?" Miles asked. "We can't just hide." "We aren't going to hide," I said, "and we aren't going to sue him." I walked back to the desk and looked at the frozen image of my father on the TV screen. "I know the company accounts, Miles. I know where the bodies are buried because I am the one who had to audit the graveyards." I looked at Miles. "Graham thinks in quarters. He thinks in fiscal years. He thinks money is power." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled receipt from the convenience store. I smoothed it out on the table. "He tried to kill me to save his empire," I said. "So I am not going to send him to jail. Jail is too easy. In jail, he can still be rich." I tapped the hard drive. "We are going to let them think I am dead. We are going to let them proceed with the funeral. We are going to let them feel safe. And while they are picking out my casket, we are going to dismantle Larkspur Harbor Group brick by brick." "You want revenge?" Miles asked. "No," I said, and a smile touched my lips. It was not a nice smile. "Revenge is emotional. Revenge is messy. This isn't revenge." I looked him in the eye. "This is a liquidation. I am going to bankrupt them, Miles. I am going to take every penny, every share, every asset. I am going to leave them with nothing but their last name, and then, when they are standing in the rubble, I will show them this tape. Now," I said, pulling a chair up to the desk. "Tell me about the insurance policy Graham took out on me. I want to know exactly how much my life was worth to him." The headline on the mute television screen in our damp motel room was perfect. It was crisp, tragic, and completely devoid of the word murder. Tragedy at sea. Heiress. Piper Holmes. Missing after yacht accident. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, eating a stale bagel I had bought from the vending machine, watching my own obituary being written in real time. The news anchor, a woman with hair so stiff it could withstand a hurricane, wore a practiced expression of somber concern. She spoke about the treacherous currents of the Atlantic and the unpredictable storm that had claimed the life of one of the state's most private socialites. It was a masterclass in public relations. My family had not just committed a crime, they had curated a narrative. "Turn it up," I said to Miles. He pressed the volume button on the remote, wincing as the movement pulled at his bruised ribs. The scene cut to the gates of Ridgecroft Manor, my childhood home, a sprawling estate of stone and ivy that looked like it belonged in a period drama about repressed aristocrats. A podium had been set up on the manicured lawn. Graham Holmes stepped up to the microphone. He was wearing a black cashmere suit, cut slim to hide the paunch of middle age. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked like a man who had not slept in days, a man crushed by the weight of fatherhood. It was the best performance of his life. "We are devastated," Graham said, his voice cracking perfectly on the last syllable. "Piper she was the light of this family. We went out to celebrate her birthday. We wanted to give her a night to remember. We never imagined the sea would take her from us." He paused, wiping a non-existent tear from his cheek. "We are cooperating fully with the Coast Guard," he continued, "but they have told us that after 36 hours in these waters, hope is a luxury we cannot afford. We ask for privacy as we navigate this unbearable darkness." Next to him stood Sloane. She was a vision of grieving elegance. She wore a high-necked black dress and a veil, for God's sake, that obscured just enough of her face to make her look mysterious, but not enough to hide her perfect bone structure. She held Graham's arm, playing the dutiful, supportive daughter. But I knew Sloane. I watched her hand. She was squeezing Graham's bicep, not in comfort, but in a signal. "Wrap it up, Dad. You are losing the light." And then there was Ethan. My fiancé stood a few feet behind them. He was looking down at his shoes, his shoulders hunched, to the cameras. He looked like a broken man. But the camera zoomed in, just for a second, and I saw his eyes. He was not looking at the ground. He was looking past the reporters, toward the circular driveway where the mourners' cars were parked. He was scanning the Bentleys and the Mercedes, his eyes darting with a hungry, nervous energy. He was calculating the net worth of the sympathy he was receiving. "He looks sad," Miles said, squinting at the screen. "He looks like he's wondering if he can keep the engagement ring," I corrected. "It is a 3-carat diamond. He probably already pawned it." The news segment shifted to a legal analyst who explained the situation with helpful, simple graphics. "Because the body has not been recovered," the analyst explained. "The family is petitioning the court for an expedited declaration of death. Usually, this process takes years, but given the testimony of the 3 survivors and the evidence of the storm, the Holmes family is arguing that the presumption of death is irrefutable. They are citing the need to settle the estate to protect the employees of Larkspur Harbor Group." I let out a short, sharp laugh. "Protect the employees. That is rich. They are moving fast," Miles said, turning away from the TV to open his laptop. "Faster than I thought. Look at this." He spun the laptop toward me. It was logged into the internal company server, which Miles could still access via a backdoor he had installed for compliance audits. "They have called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning," Miles said. "Agenda Item 1, Transfer of Voting Rights. Agenda Item 2, Emergency Access to the Beatrice Holmes Trust for Operating Stability." They were not even waiting for the memorial service. They were trying to break the lock on the $48 million before the ink on my death certificate was dry. They were going to argue that the company was in crisis because of the tragedy, and that the only way to save it was to unlock the capital immediately. It was bold, it was reckless, and it was going to work. Unless I stopped it. "I need a phone," I said. "Not a burner. I need a secure line." "Who are you calling?" "Wexler and Hume," I said. "My grandmother's lawyers." Miles raised an eyebrow. "If you call them, they have to report you are alive. The game ends. Graham goes to jail." "Sure, but the money gets tied up in litigation for a decade." I am not going to tell them I am alive, I said. I am going to tell them I am watching. We drove to a truck stop 10 miles outside of Greyhaven. I used a payphone that smelled of diesel and old tobacco. I dialed the private number for Arthur Henderson, the senior partner at Wexler and Hume. He had been my grandmother's confidant, a man who wore bow ties and believed in the sanctity of a signature. Wexler and Hume, Henderson speaking. His voice was gravelly. Tired, he had probably been fielding calls from Graham all morning. Mr. Henderson? I said. I pitched my voice low, authoritative, stripping away the tremble. This is a client calling regarding the Beatrice Holmes Trust. Account number 77 Alpha Bravo. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence. That account is currently flagged. Madam, Henderson said, his tone icy. The beneficiary is missing. I am aware of the news. Arthur, I said, using his first name. But until you see a body, or until a judge signs a paper, that trust is active, and I am invoking the protocol of 2018. I heard the sharp intake of breath on the other end. The protocol of 2018 was a clause I had added myself, 2 years ago, when I first started suspecting Graham was mishandling the company dividends. It was a living man's lock. Protocol 2018 requires biometric verification for any changes to the trustee structure, Henderson said slowly. Or, in the absence of biometrics, a 2-factor verbal authentication code established by the beneficiary. The code, I said, reciting the words I had memorized, is, the sea refuses no river. Silence. I could hear the clock ticking in his office. That is correct, Henderson whispered. My God. Piper? I am not confirming my identity. Mr. Henderson, I said quickly. I am simply an authorized representative invoking the lock. Listen to me very carefully. No funds are to be released. No voting shares are to be transferred. If Graham Holmes or anyone else attempts to access the principal, you are to trigger a Level 4 security freeze. That means the accounts are locked until the beneficiary appears in person at your office. Do you understand? A Level 4 freeze requires me to notify the board that there is a security contest, Henderson said. Graham will know someone is blocking him. Let him know, I said. Tell him the system rejected his request. Tell him the ghost in the machine is fighting back. But do not tell him who called. If you do, the safety of the beneficiary is compromised. I understand, Henderson said. The freeze is active. Piper, if this is you, be careful. They are already drafting the press release for the funeral. Let them mourn, I said. It will make the resurrection more dramatic. I hung up. Back at the motel, Miles was deep into the financial records he had pulled from the hard drive. He looked paler than usual. The bruising on his face had turned a sickly yellow-green. It is worse than I thought, Miles said as I walked in. Graham didn't just want the money to expand. He needs it to breathe. He pointed to a spreadsheet that was a sea of red ink. Graham has been leveraging the company assets for 5 years. Miles explained. He took out massive loans against the dockyards, against the ships, even against the future revenue of the trust. He used the money to fund bad investments, tech startups that failed, real estate in Dubai that never got built, and Sloane's lifestyle. How bad is it? I asked. He is insolvent. Piper, the banks have called in the bridge loans. These are short-term, high-interest loans used to plug gaps. They are due in 30 days. If he doesn't pay them back, the bank seize everything, the company, the house, the cars. He is 4 weeks away from being homeless. I stared at the numbers. It was staggering. Millions of dollars, burned in a bonfire of vanity. That is why the timeline was so tight, I realized. He didn't just need the trust money for greed. He needed it to cover the hole before the auditors found it. My death was his bailout package. Exactly, Miles said. If you freeze the trust, you don't just stop him from getting rich. You kill him. The banks will eat him alive. Good, I said. But not yet. I paced the small room. The carpet was sticky under my cheap sneakers. If we trigger the collapse now, the banks will seize the company. They will chop it up and sell it for parts. The employees, the mechanics, the dock workers, the people who actually built this business, will lose their pensions. I cannot let that happen. So what is the plan? Miles asked. We need a 2-layer trap, I said. Layer 1 is the murder charge. We have the video. But that just puts Graham in prison. It doesn't save the company. Layer 2 is the money. I sat down opposite him. We need to let Graham think he's winning. We need him to dig the hole deeper. Let him take out more loans based on the expectation of the inheritance. This rider provides for a triple indemnity payout in the event of accidental death occurring in international waters, specifically due to drowning or unrecovered remains. Triple indemnity. The base policy was $5 million. Triple indemnity meant $15 million. I felt a cold smile spread across my face. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a wolf that has just found the throat of the stag. They didn't just want the trust, I whispered. They bet against me. They took out a wager on my drowning. It is sick, Miles said, looking away. It is business, I said. And it is the mistake that is going to bury them. I stood up and grabbed my jacket. We are leaving. Miles, we need to go to the city. I need to buy a suit, and you need to see a doctor who doesn't ask questions. Why the suit? Miles asked. Because in a few days, my family is throwing a funeral, I said. And I hate to be underdressed for a party. I looked at the TV one last time. Graham was hugging Sloane, his face buried in her shoulder. They looked so united, so strong. They had no idea that the victim was not dead. She was just auditing the books, and the balance was due. The maritime fatality rider. I stared at the claws on the glowing laptop screen, the words burning themselves into my retinas. It was a sterile, legal paragraph buried on page 42 of the Ponzi document. But to me, it read like a contract for a hit. Triple indemnity, I said, my voice barely a whisper. They did not just want me dead, Miles. They wanted to hit the jackpot. We were still in the motel room, the air conditioner rattling in the window frame like a dying lung. Miles was sitting on the floor, surrounded by piles of printed spreadsheets we had generated from the hard drive. He looked up, rubbing his bruised jaw. It is a specific rider, Miles explained, tapping the paper. Usually reserved for deep-sea fishermen or oil rig workers. It pays out 300% of the face value if the insured party dies in international waters and the body is not recovered within 30 days. It assumes the body is lost to the elements. $15 million, I said. $5 million for the base policy, tripled because the ocean ate the evidence. I stood up and paced the small space between the bed and the wall. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. My father, Graham Holmes, had looked at his youngest daughter and seen a lottery ticket. He had calculated the odds, weighed the risk, and decided that $15 million was worth the price of my soul. But they cannot just claim it, I said, stopping in front of the window. Insurance companies are sharks. They do not write checks that size without an investigation. They need proof. That is the problem, Miles said grimly. They have it. He shuffled through the papers and handed me a scanned document. It was a Certificate of Seaworthiness and Incident Report, stamped by the Larkspur Harbor Master's office. To get the payout, Miles said. Graham needs a chain of evidence. He needs the ship's log, which he forged. He needs witness statements, which Sloane, and Ethan provided. And he needs an official confirmation that the vessel was in good condition and that the accident was consistent with environmental factors. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the document. It was a scrawl I recognized. Jimenez. Jimenez, I spat. The Port Authority liaison. Graham has been paying for his golf club membership for 10 years. It is worse than golf fees, Miles said. I found a wire transfer from a shell company to Jimenez's personal account 2 days ago, $50,000. That was the price of his signature. He certified that the Morrowind was inspected before departure and that the safety equipment was fully operational. He validated their lie. I felt a cold fury rising in my chest. They had built a fortress of paper to protect their crime. They had corrupted the system so thoroughly that the truth was suffocating under layers of bureaucracy. They want to eat the insurance money, I said, realizing the full scope of the plan. The trust fund is the long-term play to save the company, but the insurance payout, that is cash, liquid cash. That is what they will use to pay off the immediate debts and keep up appearances while the courts process the death certificate. They are going to call it solace money, Miles predicted. Compensation for their immeasurable loss. No, I said. They are not. I grabbed my burner phone. Who is the lead underwriter for this policy? Which firm? Sterling Holloway, Miles said. They are tough. They have a fraud investigation unit that makes the FBI look like mall cops. Good, I said. I am going to give them a breadcrumb. I did not call Sterling Holloway directly. That would be too risky. If they traced the call to a motel in Greyhaven, the hunt would be on. Instead, I called Arthur Henderson, my grandmother's lawyer, again. Arthur, I said when he picked up, don't speak. Just listen. I am listening, he said. His voice was tight with stress. I am sending a courier to your office with a sealed envelope. I lied. There was no courier, but he did not need to know that. Inside, you will find a reference number for a policy held by Sterling Holloway. I need you to contact their fraud division anonymously. You are to tell them that a concerned party suggests they subpoena the maintenance logs of the Morrowind from the independent contractor we used 3 months ago. Not the logs provided by the family. Why? Arthur whispered. Because the independent logs will show the GPS and the tender were due for replacement. But they were functional, I said. The family is claiming mechanical failure caused the accident. If the insurance investigator sees the discrepancy, they will not pay. They will freeze the claim. Piper, Arthur said, breaking protocol. You are playing a dangerous game. If you stop the money, Graham will be cornered. A cornered animal bites. Let him bite, I said. I want him to bleed. I hung up. I did not need to send a courier. Arthur was smart. He would make the call. He would plant the seed of doubt. And once an insurance investigator smells rot, they do not stop digging until they find the corpse. Now, I said to Miles, let us see what they are spending. Miles had managed to mirror the corporate credit card feeds. It was illegal. It was inadmissible in court, and it was the most satisfying thing I had ever seen. The screen refreshed. The transactions scrolled by in a waterfall of excess. October 13th, the Plaza Hotel, New York, suite upgrade, $12,000. Sloan, October 14th, Bergdorf Goodman, vintage couture, $18,000. Sloan again. She was mourning me by buying a new wardrobe. October 14th, private aviation charter, Teterboro to Miami, $25,000. Graham. He was flying south, probably to calm down investors, burning cash he did not have on a jet he could not afford. They are bleeding the accounts dry, Miles said, shaking his head. They are spending the insurance money before it even hits the bank. Keep scrolling, I said. Look for Ethan. Ethan Vale did not have a corporate card, but Graham had a slush fund account, labeled consulting fees, that he used for bribes and off-book payments. There, I pointed. A transfer had cleared yesterday. Payee, EV, Design Solutions. Amount, $150,000. Memo, architectural retainer. Architectural retainer, I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Ethan hasn't designed a building in 2 years. His license is suspended. $150,000, Miles murmured. That is a lot of money for a retainer. It is not a retainer, I said. It is a payoff. It is the price of his silence. And, I paused, looking closer at the transaction details. Look at the routing number. That is not his business account. That goes to a bank in Las Vegas. Gambling debts, Miles said. He sold me, I said. my voice devoid of emotion. He sold the woman he was going to marry for $150,000 to pay off a casino marker. It was cheaper than I expected. I thought I was worth at least $200,000. I stood there, staring at the number, 150,000. That was the value of my life to the man who had held me while I slept. That was the value of every I love you, every shared dream, every promise. I need to talk to him, I said. Piper, no, Miles warned. If you call him, he will tell Graham. He won't tell Graham, I said. Because he is a coward, and because I am going to scare the living hell out of him. I waited until nightfall. I knew Ethan's habits. He would be at his apartment in the city, drinking scotch, staring at the walls, terrified that the silence would eat him alive. I used a spoofing app to mask my number. I set the caller ID to unknown. I dialed. It rang 4 times. Hello? His voice was ragged. He sounded drunk. I didn't say anything. I just breathed, a slow, steady breath into the microphone. Hello? Who is this? Ethan asked. His voice pitched up a notch. Is this the press? I told you people to leave me alone. I let the silence stretch for 10 seconds. 10 seconds is a long time when you are guilty. Ethan, I whispered. I didn't use a voice changer. I wanted him to hear the gravel in my throat, the salt water that had not quite left my lungs. There was a crash on the other end, like he had dropped the glass. Piper, he breathed. It was a sound of pure terror. No, that is not. Who is doing this? Sloan? Is this some kind of sick joke? $150,000, I said. I spoke the numbers slowly. Clearly, he stopped breathing. That is the number, isn't it, Ethan? I continued. Direct deposit to the Las Vegas account. Architectural retainer. Oh my God, he whimpered. Oh my God. You are dead. I saw you. I saw you go under. You saw what you wanted to see, I said. You saw a way out of debt. You saw a check. Piper, please. He began to sob. He made me. Graham. He said he would ruin me. He said he would tell everyone about the embezzlement. I didn't have a choice. We always have a choice. Ethan, I said. You chose the money. Where are you? He begged. Please, tell me where you are. I will come get you. We can fix this. I still love you. Piper, I swear. I laughed. It was a cold, dark sound that frightened even me. You don't love me, Ethan. You love your life. And right now, your life belongs to me. What do you want? He asked. I will give the money back. I will testify. Just tell me what to do. I want you to sit there, I said. I want you to sit in that apartment and look at the door. I want you to wonder every time the elevator dings if it is me. And when Graham asks you why you look like you have seen a ghost, you are going to smile and tell him everything is fine. Why? He whispered. Because if you tell him I am alive, I said, I will release the recording of you helping him drag my body across the deck, and you won't go to prison for fraud. Ethan, you will go to prison for conspiracy to commit capital murder. You will die in a cage. I killed the line. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. It was the adrenaline of the hunt. I had him. He was the weak link, and I had just put a crack in the chain. Miles was watching me from the bed. He looked impressed and a little terrified. You broke him, Miles said. I just reminded him of the terms of his contract, I said. Well, you better be ready for what Sloan is planning, Miles said. He turned his laptop around. I found a file in her personal cloud drive. It is titled, Contingency Protocol C. I sat down next to him. Protocol C? It is a media strategy, Miles said. Prepared by her crisis management firm. Look at the bullet points. I read the document. It was a roadmap for character assassination. Scenario. Subject, Piper, is found alive or resurfaces. Narrative strategy. The Gone Girl defense. Key talking points. Piper has a history of mental instability and attention-seeking behavior. Fabricate anonymous school reports. Claim the disappearance was a staged cry for help or a malicious attempt to extort the family. Suggest substance abuse issues, pill addiction. Frame the narrative as a family trying to help a sick daughter while she tries to destroy them. If you show up, Miles said, they are not going to apologize. They are going to commit you. They are going to say you jumped off that boat in a manic episode and swam to shore to frame them. They will use their doctors to testify that you are delusional. They have a script, I said, reading Sloane's notes. Look sad, but resolved. Piper needs professional help, not a platform. It was brilliant, and it was evil. They would turn my survival into a symptom of my insanity. They think they can spin this, I said. They think that because there is no body, the story is malleable. How do we fight that? Miles asked. It is your word against the Holmes empire. I stood up and walked to the closet where my new suit was hanging. It was a sharp, charcoal gray power suit, the kind of suit a CEO wears to a hostile takeover. We don't fight it with words, I said. We fight it with a signature. I turned to Miles. Sloane likes gifts, I said. She loves the drama of a big reveal. So I am going to give her one. What are you talking about? I am going to prepare a package, I said. A gift for the Holmes Legacy Foundation. They are having their gala in 2 days, right? The memorial gala? Yes, Miles said. At the Westcliff Hotel. Perfect, I said. I am going to send a donation. A very special donation. One that requires a public acknowledgement. One that traps them in their own lie before I even walk in the door. I looked at the insurance papers, the bank transfers, and Sloane's PR plan. They built a house of cards, I said. I am not going to blow it down. I am going to glue the cards together so they can't fold them when the police arrive. Get the printer ready. Miles, I said, we have some legal documents to forge, or rather, to correct. There is a specific kind of freedom that comes with being dead on paper. The world stops looking at you. The cameras stop tracking your face. The algorithms that usually predict your shopping habits and your location lose interest when the state believes you are a corpse drifting somewhere off the continental shelf. You become a ghost, and ghosts can walk through walls that living people cannot. I decided not to resurrect myself just yet. If I walked into a police station now, I would be Piper Holmes, the hysterical victim. I would be subjected to questioning, to psychiatric evaluations, to the inevitable media circus that my family would manipulate to paint me as unstable. But as a ghost, I was the hunter. We need to move, I told Miles. Greyhaven is too small. If Graham is paranoid, and he will start sweeping the coastal towns. We abandoned the damp motel room in room 104. We left no prints, no trash, nothing but the smell of cheap bleach. We ditched our burner phones in a public bin and bought new ones at a bodega 3 towns over. We bought new SIM cards with cash. We became smoke. We moved into the city, into the dense, anonymous heart of the financial district. I used a shell company I had set up years ago for a personal investment project, one I had never told my father about, to rent a short-term corporate apartment. It was a glass box on the 30th floor, overlooking the very skyline my family thought they owned. From here, we could see the Larkspur Harbor Group headquarters. It was a sleek, steel monolith near the water. I stood by the window, watching the lights on the executive floor burning late into the night. They are panicking, Miles said, setting up his server on the glass dining table. Look at the network traffic. He turned the screen toward me. It was a digital map of the company's internal communications. It was lit up like a Christmas tree. Graham is trying to liquidate assets, Miles explained. He is trying to sell off the heavy crane division to a Chinese conglomerate. It is a fire sale. He needs the cash to pay the bridge loans, I said. He thought my death would unlock the trust immediately, but since we froze it, he is scrambling. I had instructed Arthur Henderson to place a temporary administrative hold on the trust. It was not a full blockade. That would require a court order and might reveal I was alive. It was a bureaucratic stall. We cited irregularities in the beneficiary status, and demanded a secondary audit before any funds could be released. It was the kind of red tape my father hated more than anything. "He is hitting a wall," I said, a cold satisfaction settling in my gut. "Let's make the wall higher." I picked up my new secure phone. "I want you to trigger the covenant clauses on the dockside warehouses," I told Miles. "The environmental clauses?" "Yes. Send an anonymous tip to the EPA about a potential leak in Sector 4. It is a lie, but it will trigger a mandatory inspection. That freezes the asset value. He won't be able to borrow against the warehouses if they are under investigation," Miles typed furiously. "Done. The tip is sent. The inspectors will be there by Monday." My father was fighting a war on two fronts. He was fighting the banks who wanted their money, and he was fighting an invisible enemy who seemed to know the exact structural weaknesses of his empire. He probably thought it was bad luck. He probably thought the universe was testing him. He didn't know it was his daughter. The reaction was immediate. The next morning, the news cycle shifted. "Breaking news," the anchor announced. "The Holmes family announces a major philanthropic event." I watched as Sloane stepped onto a podium. This time not at the Manor, but in the ballroom of the Westcliff Hotel. She looked ravishing in a midnight blue gown, her eyes dry and determined. "In the wake of our tragic loss," Sloane said, her voice steady, "we have decided to honor Piper's memory not with silence, but with action. This Friday, the Holmes Legacy Foundation will host a memorial gala. We will be announcing a new direction for the Larkspur Group, dedicated to the preservation of our oceans." I laughed out loud. "Preservation of our oceans." She pushed me into one. "It is a cover," Miles said. "Read the press release. The gala is a fundraiser." "Yes, but look at the guest list. The board of directors, the bank representatives, the investors. It is a shareholder meeting disguised as a funeral." I realized. They are going to use the gala to announce the restructuring. They are going to compel the board to sign over the voting rights in a public setting. Using Piper's memory as the emotional leverage, who could vote against the grieving family at their own memorial? "It is genius," Miles admitted. "Evil, but genius." "It is a stage," I corrected, "and every stage needs a surprise guest." I began to design the gift. I needed something that would appear benevolent but would function as a legal bear trap. I spent hours drafting the document. It was a deed of gift. On the surface, it looked like a posthumous donation from my private estate to the foundation. It offered a massive sum, $5 million from my personal savings, which I didn't actually have liquid, but they didn't know that, to the foundation. But the deed had conditions, buried in the fine print, in the same complex legalese my father used to trap others. Was a warranty of good faith. By accepting the gift and countersigning the deed, which Sloane would have to do publicly to get the check, the recipient swore under penalty of perjury that they had no knowledge of, and were not complicit in any criminal act regarding the donor. It also included a clause that stated any material misrepresentation regarding the donor's status would result in the immediate forfeiture of all personal assets of the signatory to the donor's designated charity. If Sloane signed it, she was committing wire fraud and perjury in front of 300 witnesses. If she didn't sign it, she looked like she was rejecting her dead sister's last wish. "You are handing her a pen explicitly to write her own confession," Miles said, reading the draft. "I am handing her a rope," I said. "She is the one who will tie the noose." But while we were planning the offensive, the defense was crumbling. Miles froze. He was looking at the live feed from a security camera we had tapped into back at the Greyhaven Marina. "Piper," he said, his voice tight. "Look." I leaned over his shoulder. On the grainy screen, a black sedan was parked at the end of the dock where we had abandoned the Morrowind. A man in a tan trench coat was walking around the boat. He wasn't police. He moved differently. He was taking photos of the hull, of the lock I had picked, of the empty flare gun case. "Who is that?" I asked. "I ran the license plate," Miles said. "It is a rental, but I recognize the guy. That is Vance. He is a private investigator my father uses for delicate matters. He is the one who dug up dirt on the Union leaders last year. He found the boat, I said. I knew he would. He is talking to the harbor master, Miles said. He is showing him a picture of you. Graham knows I am not dead, I whispered. Or at least, he suspects. The body didn't wash up. The accounts are freezing mysteriously. He smells a rat. If Vance tracks us here, Miles said, we are done. He won't arrest us. He will make us disappear for real this time. He won't find us, I said, because we are going to send him somewhere else. I needed a decoy. I grabbed my purse. I have one active credit card left, I said. The one I used for the motel. They know about it by now. So destroy it, Miles said. No, I said. Use it. I logged into a travel booking site using a VPN routed through Canada. I booked a bus ticket, Greyhound, from a station in upstate New York, heading to Montreal. Departure time, tomorrow morning. I am buying a ticket, I said, and I am going to order a rideshare to pick me up at a coffee shop near the bus station. I won't be there, obviously, but the digital footprint will be. You are sending Vance to Canada, Miles smiled. I am sending him on a wild goose chase in the snow, I said. He will see the booking. He will see the credit card hit. He will assume I am running for the border to hide. He will follow the money. I booked the ticket, $200, a cheap price to buy us 3 days of invisibility. Now, I said, turning back to the real work. Let's talk about the FBI. You said we couldn't go to the FBI yet, Miles said. You said Graham has connections. We can't walk into the local field office, I agreed. But we can submit a tip to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN. I pulled up the dossier we had compiled, the wire transfers, the insurance rider, the forged safety logs, the email regarding the architectural retainer for Ethan. This isn't a murder case anymore. Miles, it is a racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations case, RICO. I explained the strategy. If we reported a murder, it would go to homicide. Homicide cops are overworked and local, but if we reported a multi-million-dollar insurance fraud scheme involving wire transfers across state lines, that triggered federal jurisdiction. The FBI creates a task force for money. They love seizing assets. We are not going to send this to the police, I said. We are going to send it to the special agent in charge of the white-collar crimes division. And we are going to send it via a secure courier. Time to arrive exactly 1 hour after the gala begins. Why the timing? Because, I said, looking at the invitation to the gala on my screen, I want the agents to walk through the doors just as Sloane is holding up my check. I want the flashbulbs to capture the moment they put the handcuffs on her. I spent the rest of the night refining the package. I included the hard drive data. I included the video of them dumping my body, but I put a digital lock on the video file. It was password protected. Why lock the video? Miles asked. That is the smoking gun. Because I want to trade it, I said. I want to walk into that room, look my father in the eye, and give him the password myself. I want him to know that I am the one who pulled the trigger. The days blurred into a countdown. The gala was approaching like a storm front. I ordered the box for the gift. It was velvet, deep crimson. I placed the documents inside. I sealed it with wax. It looked like a royal decree. For Sloane, I wrote on the card. From Piper. Miles looked at me. He had cleaned up. The bruises were fading. He looked like a lawyer again, not a fugitive. Are you ready for this? He asked. Once you walk into that hotel, there is no going back. You can't be a ghost anymore. I don't want to be a ghost, I said, checking the glint of the fake diamond earrings I had bought to complete my disguise. I want to be the haunting. Vance is in Montreal, Miles reported, checking his phone. He just pinged a cell tower near the border. He took the bait. Good, I said. That leaves the door to the West Cliff wide open. I looked at the calendar. Friday, the 13th, a fitting day for a resurrection. I picked up the velvet box. It felt heavy. It weighed exactly as much as my family's greed. "Get the car. Miles," I said. "We have a party to crash." I was dead on paper. My death certificate was sitting on a judge's desk, waiting for a signature. My accounts were being closed. My clothes were being packed into boxes. But in the reflection of the high-rise window, I didn't look dead. I looked dangerous. I was about to walk into a room full of sharks without a cage, armed only with a pen and a velvet box. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the water. I was the thing dragging them under. The box sat on the glass dining table of our high-rise safe house, looking less like a present and more like a loaded weapon. I had commissioned it from a bespoke stationer in the city, who asked no questions as long as the cash was crisp. It was covered in deep, blood-red velvet, the kind that feels expensive under your fingertips. It was heavy, weighted with lead in the lining to give it substantiality. On the lid, embossed in gold foil, were 4 words. For Sloane. From Piper. It was the bait. And I knew my sister well enough to know she would not just bite. She would swallow the hook whole. Inside, nestled in white silk where a diamond necklace or a deed to a vacation home might usually sit, was a single, bound document. It was titled, "The Holmes Legacy Grant, Preservation and Continuity Agreement, to the untrained eye, or to a greedy eye like Sloane's." It looked like a posthumous miracle. I had drafted it to appear as though, prior to my death, I had set aside a massive personal contribution to the family foundation, a final act of sisterly love. The grant offered a $5 million injection into the foundation's accounts, effective immediately upon the public acceptance of the gift, but it was a legal bear trap. "You are sure this holds water?" Miles asked. He was pacing the apartment, wearing a new suit we had bought off the rack, trying to get used to the feeling of being a corporate shark again. "It holds water," I said, running my finger over the wax seal I was about to apply. "Look at Section 4, Paragraph B." Miles picked up the copy I had printed for him. "The recipient," he read, "by accepting these funds, hereby swears under penalty of perjury that the circumstances regarding the donor's absence are accurately reflected in the official foundation statement attached hereto as Exhibit A." "And Exhibit A," I said, "is a transcript of the lie they are telling the police. It states I fell. It states it was an accident. It states they did everything to save me." "So if she signs this to get the $5 million, Miles realized, she is legally swearing to the false narrative. "Exactly," I said. "And look at Section 9, the Financial Integrity Clause." He flipped the page. "The recipient warrants that all foundation funds and associated corporate accounts are free of encumbrances, undisclosed liens, or fraudulent activity. Any material breach of this warranty results in the immediate transfer of the recipient's personal assets to the donor's secondary beneficiary, which is the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society," I said. "I chose them because Graham hates environmentalists." I took the wax stamp, a heavy brass seal with an antique H on it, and pressed it into the hot red pool on the envelope. "This document turns the gala into a tribunal," I explained. "Sloane thinks she is opening a check, but she is actually signing a confession. If she signs this in front of the press, she is locking herself into a fraud charge. If she admits later that she lied about the accident, she triggers the perjury clause. If the FBI finds the embezzlement later, she triggers the asset forfeiture clause." "It is a mirror," Miles said softly. "You are forcing them to look at themselves." "No," I said, placing the box in a courier bag. "I am forcing them to sell their souls in public, and I want the receipt." While I prepared the trap, my lawyer, Arthur Henderson, was busy shaking the cage. We had timed the legal notices perfectly, yesterday afternoon. Every bank that held a Larkspur Harbor account received a Notice of Compliance review from the Wexler and Hume firm. We did not accuse them of theft. We simply stated that, due to the uncertain status of the primary trust beneficiary, all associated accounts were subject to a 90-day audit period. It was not a freeze. It was a slowdown. It meant that every time Graham tried to move money to pay his loan sharks or his gambling debts, a red flag popped up on a compliance officer's screen. Through Miles's backdoor access to the company's security cameras, we watched the fallout in real time. Graham was in his office, and he was melting down. His face was a mask of purple rage. He was screaming at his CFO, a terrified man named Jenkins who was clutching a stack of files. "What do you mean, pending review?" Graham roared, slamming his hand on the mahogany desk. "I need that transfer to clear by Friday. The bridge loan is due." "The bank says it is automated." "Sir," Jenkins stammered, "because of the situation with Piper's trust, the system is flagging everything for manual approval." "Get me the insurance company," Graham yelled. "Get Sterling and Halloway on the phone. If we can't move the company cash, we need the policy payout." They are asking for more documentation." "Sir," Jenkins whispered, "they want the maintenance logs for the tender again." Graham threw a crystal paperweight across the room. It shattered against the wall, inches from a framed photo of me. "They are stalling," Graham hissed. "Someone is stalling us." He turned to the window. Looking out at the harbor, he looked smaller than I remembered. The arrogance was still there, but it was brittle now. He was a man standing on a cracking ice sheet, listening to the sound of the water beneath him. "He knows," Miles said, watching the screen. "He doesn't know it is you, but he knows the universe has turned against him. He is going to push Sloan," I predicted. "He needs a win. He needs the gala to be a massive success to reassure the creditors. He is going to make sure that night is a spectacle." And I was right. 2 hours later, we intercepted an email from Sloan to the event planner. Subject: a surprise for the finale. Content: we have received a special package from Piper's estate, a final gift. I want to open it on stage, right after the memorial video. Make sure the spotlight is on me. We need this to go viral. The narrative needs to be the sister's last wish. Make sure the press is ready. I read the email and felt a cold shiver of disgust. She had not even opened the box yet. She didn't care what was inside. She just saw from Piper and thought, opportunity. She was going to monetize my memory before my body was even cold. "She wants a viral moment," I said to Miles. "I am going to give her one she will never forget." That evening, the atmosphere in the safe house shifted. The frenetic energy of planning faded into a heavy, waiting silence. We were 36 hours away from the gala. Miles was sitting by the window, watching the city lights. He had a glass of scotch in his hand, the first drink I had seen him take since the boat. "You know," he said, not looking at me, "when you first pulled me out of that pantry, I was terrified of you." "You should have been," I said, checking the polish on my shoes. "I had a flare gun." "No," Miles said. "I mean, I thought you were going to be like them. I thought you were going to burn the house down with everyone inside. I thought this was going to be a blood feud." He turned to look at me. His face was still healing, the yellow bruises fading into his skin, but his eyes were clear. "But this," he gestured to the paperwork, the velvet box, the timeline of federal intervention we had mapped out. "This isn't arson. Piper, this is surgery. Arson is emotional," I said. "Arson is messy. I don't want to destroy the company. Miles, there are 300 people working at the docks who didn't try to kill me. If I burn it all down, they starve." "You are declawing them," Miles said. "You are removing their ability to hurt anyone ever again. You are not just taking their money, you are taking their power." "The money is just the scorecard," I said. "The power is the weapon. Graham uses his name like a cudgel. Sloan uses her image like a scalpel. I am going to strip them of both. When I am done, Holmes won't mean power. It will mean fraud." I walked over to the window and stood beside him. "Are you ready?" I asked. "To walk back into that world?" "I don't have a choice," Miles said. "My life ended on that boat, too. The Miles Carraway who was afraid of his boss died in the pantry. I am just the guy holding the evidence now. He paused. What are you going to say? When you walk in? I had thought about this. I had rehearsed speeches in the shower. Long monologues about betrayal and justice. But they all felt fake. They felt like bad movie dialogue. I am not going to make a speech, I said. Speeches are for people who need to convince you of something. I don't need to convince anyone. I just need to be there. Just be there? When a dead woman walks into her own funeral, I said. She doesn't need to scream. Her presence is the scream. I looked at the clock. It was nearly midnight. The city was asleep, but I was wide awake. My nerves were vibrating at a frequency that felt like electricity. And then, my phone buzzed. Not the new secure phone, the old one. The one I had kept turned off in a Faraday bag at the bottom of my suitcase, only turning it on for 60 seconds a day to check for pings. I froze. What is it? Miles asked. Seeing my face, I pulled the phone out. The screen was glowing in the dark room. A single text message. Sender. Ethan. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stared at the name. The man who had promised to love me. The man who had sold me for $150,000. I unlocked the screen. Text. You are alive, aren't you? I stared at the words. He didn't know. He couldn't know. He was fishing. He was terrified after my call to him the other night. The anonymous call where I read him the transaction number. He was spiraling. He is cracking, Miles said, looking over my shoulder. He is panic texting a dead girl's number. He is dangerous, I said. A scared coward is the most dangerous thing in the world because they are unpredictable. If he goes to Graham, Miles started. He won't, I said. If he goes to Graham and says, I think Piper is alive, Graham will ask him why, and Ethan would have to admit that someone knows about the gambling debt payoff. He can't tell Graham without exposing his own motive for the murder. So what do? I let him sweat, I said. I want him walking into that gala looking like he hasn't slept in a week. I want him jumping at shadows. When I walk through those doors, I want Ethan to be the first one to break. I typed nothing. I let the message sit there, unanswered. The silence would be louder than any threat I could type. One more day, I whispered. I put the phone back in the bag. I went to the closet and looked at the dress I had bought. It wasn't black. Everyone else would be in black. It was white. Stark, blinding, bone white, the color of a ghost, the color of seafoam. I touched the fabric. Tomorrow, I said to the empty room. We opened the box. The text message from Ethan sat on my burner phone screen like a digital wound. Em kan sung phải không? You are alive, aren't you? It was a desperate cast into the dark, a reflex of a guilty conscience. I didn't reply immediately. I let him stew. I let him stare at his phone for 3 hours until the silence became unbearable. Then, I sent coordinates. No words, just a pin drop. The location was a small, sterile conference room in a shared workspace building on the edge of the financial district. It was neutral ground, or so he would think. In reality, it was a trap. I had rented it through a shell company. I had my lawyer, Arthur Henderson, set up a secure, encrypted camera feed, and I had Miles Carraway sitting in the adjacent room, behind a thin partition. With a recording device, I sat at the head of the long, empty table. I wore my new white suit. I looked like the ghost he feared I was. Ethan arrived 10 minutes early. He looked wretched. The handsome architect I had once planned to marry was gone. In his place was a twitchy, hollow-eyed man wearing a wrinkled shirt. He burst through the door, eyes wild, scanning the room until they landed on me. He froze. His face went gray. Piper, he breathed. He reached out, as if to touch a hologram. Oh my God, it is true. Sit down, Ethan, I said. My voice was calm. It wasn't the voice of his fiancée. It was the voice of a judge. He stumbled to the chair opposite me. He tried to smile, a pathetic, trembling thing. I knew it. I felt it. I told Graham. You didn't tell Graham anything. I cut him off. If you had told Graham, there would be men with guns coming through that door right now. Not just you. You are here because you are scared. Ethan, you are here to save yourself. He slumped. Piper, you have to listen. He made me do it. Your father. He is a monster. He found out about the debt, the Vegas markers. He bought the debt. Piper, he owned me. He said if I didn't help him, he would have me disbarred, prosecuted, ruined. He said he would hurt my parents. So you agreed to kill me instead, I said. I didn't want to, he pleaded, leaning over the table. I tried to talk him out of it. I told him we could just ask you for the money. But he said you wouldn't give it. He said you were rigid. He said you cared more about the rules than the family. He was right about that, I said. I do care about the rules. That is why we are here. I am so sorry, he wept, tears streaming down his face. I will do anything. I will fix this. I will go to the police right now. Stop lying, Ethan, I said sharply. You are not going to the police. You are here because I know about the $150,000. You are here because you want to know if I'm going to send you to prison. He wiped his face, sniffing. What do you want? The truth, I said. Everything. Every conversation you had with Graham since the boat. If you lie once, I walk out, and the FBI gets the bank transfer records. Ethan took a shaky breath. Okay. After we left you. Graham was manic. He was drinking. He kept saying it was necessary correction. He paid me the money the next morning. Direct transfer from the consulting account. What was the deal? I asked. Specifically. The money was for the debt, Ethan said. But there was a condition. I had to sign an NDA, and I had to agree to testify to your mental state if you ever came back. My blood ran cold. Explain. He has a contingency plan, Ethan whispered. He paid a psychiatrist, Dr. Aris. Do you know him? The family shrink, I said. The one who prescribed Sloane her exhaustion medication. Graham had Aris draft a file, Ethan said. It is backdated, 3 years of notes. It claims you have been suffering from paranoid delusions, dissociative episodes, and suicidal ideation. It claims you have a history of staged disappearances for attention. They are going to gaslight the court, I realized. If I show up alive, they won't deny it. They will say, "Oh, thank God. Our poor sick daughter is back." And then they will use the file to petition for a conservatorship. They will lock me up in a facility and take control of the trust as my legal guardians. Yes, Ethan said. That is the plan. If you walk into that gala tomorrow, they will have an ambulance waiting, not a welcome party. It was diabolical. It was smarter than I gave Graham credit for. He wasn't just trying to kill me. He was preparing to bury me alive in a padded room if the ocean failed him. And there is something else, Ethan said, lowering his voice further. The company structure. Graham did something to the bylaws last week. I heard him bragging to Sloane. What did he do? He added a poison pill clause to the Class A shares. Ethan said, if the voting control shifts hostilely, meaning if you try to take over, it triggers an automatic debt call. All the company's liabilities become due immediately. It forces a liquidation sale. I stared at him. A poison pill. Graham had rigged the building to explode if I tried to unlock the front door. If I claimed my inheritance and fired him, the company would self-destruct. The banks would seize the ships, the docks, the warehouses. The 300 employees I wanted to save would be on the street. He would burn it all down? I asked. He would rather see it ash than see it yours, Ethan said. I sat back in my chair. This complicated things. I couldn't just arrest him. If I arrested him and took control, the debt call would trigger. I had to defuse the bomb before I cut the wire. You have given me what I need, I said. Ethan looked hopeful. So, we are good? I helped you. I told you everything. You told me everything because I forced you to, I said. That doesn't make you good. Ethan, it makes you useful. I can be more useful, he said. I can be your spy. I can go back to the gala. I can tell you what they are doing. I looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes, but I also saw the calculation. He was already thinking about how to play both sides. I have a question for you. Ethan, I said, what are you most afraid of? He hesitated. Dying. No, I said. You are afraid of being poor. You are afraid of being a nobody. He swallowed hard. I am afraid of prison and losing everything. Good, I said. Remember that fear. It is the only thing keeping you alive. I stood up. Go to the gala. Ethan, play your part. Look sad. Stand next to Sloane. Do exactly what Graham tells you to do. And then? He asked. And then, I said, when the moment comes, you will know what to do. He stood up, looking relieved. He reached for his phone. I watched his hand. One more thing, I said. Don't text Graham. He froze. You were going to walk out that door and text him. Piper is alive, I said. You were going to try to buy your way back into his good graces by selling me out again. You were thinking, if I warn him, maybe he will protect me from her. Ethan turned pale. I had read his mind because I knew his cowardice. Go ahead, I said. Text him. He looked confused. What? Text him, I commanded. Tell him I am alive. Tell him I contacted you. But why? Because, I smiled, and it was a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Graham is paranoid. If you tell him I am alive, he will panic. He will accelerate the plan. He will make mistakes. He will act rashly at the gala. And that is exactly what I need him to do. And tell him one more thing, I added. Tell him I said, the sea refuses no river. Ethan nodded, terrified, and ran out of the room. I waited until the door closed. Then I tapped on the partition. Did you get all that? I asked. Miles walked out from the back room. He was holding the recorder. Every word, including the part about the fake psychiatric file and the poison pill. We have a problem, Miles said. The poison pill. If we trigger the takeover, the company implodes. I know, I said. Graham thinks he has checkmated me. He thinks if I live, he locks me up. If I fight, I destroy the prize. So what do we do? Miles asked. Do we walk away? No, I said. We change the game. I pulled out the velvet box containing the deed of gift. We need to bypass the Class A shares, I said. We need to separate the assets from the debts before the trigger is pulled. How? It is all one holding company. We use the foundation, I said. The Holmes Legacy Foundation is a separate legal entity. It is a non-profit. It is insulated from the corporate debt. I grabbed a pen and opened the deed. I am going to amend the gift, I said. I am not just giving them money. I am giving them the title to the Ridgecroft estate. Miles's eyes widened. The manor? You are giving them your childhood home? The house is in my name, I said. Grandmother left it to me directly, outside the trust. It is worth $20 million. If I donate the house to the foundation and Sloane accepts it, the house becomes foundation property. Okay, Miles said, following my logic. But how does that help? Because, I said, sketching the diagram on a notepad, I am adding a stipulation. The foundation must use the asset to capitalize a new subsidiary, the Holmes Maritime Rescue Fund. And I will designate the employees of Larkspur Harbor Group as the beneficiaries of that specific fund. I said, if the main company goes bankrupt because of Graham's poison pill, the rescue fund, funded by the $20 million house, is legally mandated to cover their pensions and severance. Miles stared at the paper. You are building a life raft. I am building an ark, I corrected. I am letting Graham sink the ship, but I am moving the crew to a new vessel first. And the best part? Sloane has to sign for it. She has to accept the house to get the money. She will think she is getting a mansion. She won't read the fine print about the pension guarantees until it is too late. It is brilliant, Miles said, but it is risky. You are giving up your inheritance, the house, the trust, everything. I don't want the money, Miles, I said. I never did. I just want them to stop. I looked at the phone. Ethan had sent the text. I could feel it, somewhere in the city. Graham Holmes was looking at his screen, his blood pressure spiking, his paranoia boiling over. He knew I was coming. That was good. A calm enemy plans. A panicked enemy reacts. Let's go home, I said to Miles. We have a big night tomorrow. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark of the apartment, looking at the velvet box. The gala was in 24 hours. I thought about the little girl who used to wait for her father to come home from work, hoping for a pat on the head, a smile, anything. I thought about the teenager who balanced the checkbooks to try to be useful. I thought about the woman who had stood on the deck of a yacht, holding a glass of champagne, believing she was finally loved. They were all gone. The woman sitting in the dark was something else. She was forged in salt water and betrayal. I picked up the box. Tomorrow, I whispered, we open it. Somewhere in the city. Graham was probably screaming at his lawyers. Sloane was probably practicing her crying face in the mirror. Ethan was probably drinking himself into a stupor. They thought they were the main characters. They thought this was their story. They didn't realize they were just the antagonists in mine. And the final chapter was about to begin. The Westcliff Hotel ballroom smelled of white lilies and expensive desperation. It was a scent I knew well, the perfume of high society trying to mask the stench of a scandal. I stood in the shadows of the service entrance, watching the scene unfold through the gap in the heavy velvet curtains. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. It was not the erratic hammering of the girl who had woken up on a drifting boat. It was the calculated tick of a bomb timer reaching its final seconds. Inside, the room was packed. 300 of the city's elite were seated at round tables, picking at filet mignon and whispering behind their hands. The press pit was overflowing at the back, cameras trained on the stage like the barrels of guns. My family was up there. They looked magnificent. Graham stood at the podium, bathed in a spotlight that made his silver hair shine. He looked solemn, dignified, the very picture of a grieving father. But I had the high-definition view from the monitors Miles was watching in the van outside. I could see the sweat beading on Graham's upper lip. I could see the tremor in his hands as he gripped the lectern. Sloane sat to his right. She was wearing white, not just any white, but an angelic chiffon creation that made her look fragile and pure. It was a calculated choice. She was the surviving sister, the heir apparent, the vessel of the family legacy. Ethan stood behind them, a silent sentinel. He looked terrible. His skin was pasty, his eyes darting around the room as if he expected the ceiling to collapse. Good. He was ready to break. "We are gathered here," Graham's voice boomed through the speakers, rich with practiced sorrow. "Not just to mourn a daughter, but to secure a future." Piper was a quiet soul. She loved the ocean, and though the ocean took her from us, we know she would want her family to stand strong. He paused for effect. A few people in the front row dabbed their eyes. It was a masterful performance. "That is why," Graham continued, "tonight, we are announcing the consolidation of the Holmes family assets. To ensure that the Larkspur Harbor Group continues to employ hundreds of hard-working families, I am stepping in to administer the trust that Piper can no longer claim." He gestured to a side table where a lawyer, not Arthur Henderson, but one of Graham's cronies, was laying out a leather portfolio, the transfer papers. "But first," Graham said, his voice brightening slightly, "my daughter Sloane has a special announcement regarding a final gift found among Piper's effects." Sloane stood up. She walked to the center of the stage. Holding the red velvet box I had sent, she cradled it like it was a holy relic. "Piper loved this family," Sloane said into the microphone. Her voice wavered perfectly. "She left this for us, a grant to the foundation, a symbol of her faith in us." She placed the box on the podium. I have already signed the acceptance protocols backstage, Sloane announced, flashing a dazzling smile at the cameras. We accept this gift with humble hearts. She reached for the lid of the box. And now, we share her final message with you. That was my cue. I did not run. I did not shout. I simply pushed the curtain aside and stepped into the light. My heels clicked against the marble floor. It was a sharp, distinct sound that cut through the low hum of the room. Click, click, click. The first person to see me was a waiter near the back. He dropped a tray of champagne flutes. The crash of breaking glass silenced the room instantly. Then, a woman in the third row gasped. It was a sound of pure horror. Heads turned. The whisper started as a ripple and turned into a wave. The camera shutters began to click. A frantic swarm of mechanical insects. I walked down the center aisle. I was wearing the white suit. I kept my eyes locked on the stage. Graham looked up. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like his blood had simply evaporated. He gripped the podium, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. Sloane froze, her hand still on the lid of the box. She stared at me, her eyes wide, her perfect mask shattering into confusion and terror. Ethan made a sound, a high-pitched whimper that the microphone picked up, and stumbled back. Knocking over a chair, I reached the foot of the stage. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the air. I walked up the stairs. 1, 2, 3. I stood next to my father. I could smell the scotch on his breath, hidden under mints. I leaned into the microphone. "Don't sign yet, Dad," I said. My voice was calm, conversational. "My gift needs a witness." Graham stepped back, stumbling. "Piper, you are dead?" I finished for him. "No, I am just disappointed." I turned to Sloane. She was trembling so hard the velvet box was shaking on the podium. "Go ahead, Sloane," I said softly. "Open it. You already signed the warranty. You swore under penalty of perjury that you had no knowledge of any crime. Open it and see what you bought." Sloane didn't move. She couldn't move. So I reached out and flipped the lid open. The camera zoomed in. The image was projected onto the massive screens on either side of the stage. Inside the box, there was no check. There was no heartfelt letter. There was a single, black portable hard drive. And sitting on top of it was a copy of the terrifying document Sloane had signed backstage. The one Miles and I had drafted. The one that linked her personal assets to the integrity of the foundation. And next to the document was a subpoena. "What is this?" Graham hissed, finding his voice. "Security! Get her off the stage. She is mentally unstable. She is having an episode." "I am not the one you need to worry about." "Graham," I said. The double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. "Federal agents! Nobody move!" The shout was authoritative, booming. 20 agents in windbreakers marked FBI and U.S. Treasury poured into the room. They fanned out, securing the exits. The special agent in charge, a woman named Reynolds, whom I had communicated with via courier, walked straight down the aisle. She was followed by 2 local detectives. "Graham Holmes," Agent Reynolds said, her voice cutting through the rising panic of the crowd. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit capital murder, wire fraud, insurance fraud, and racketeering." She turned to Sloane. "Sloane Holmes, you are under arrest for perjury, obstruction of justice, and accessory to attempted murder." "No!" Graham screamed. He lunged toward me, his face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You ungrateful little witch! I made you! You are nothing!" 2 agents tackled him before he could reach me. They slammed him against the podium. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed through the speakers. Sloane was sobbing now, the ugly, heaving sobs of a child who has been caught. She looked at the velvet box. "But I signed it," she wailed. "I signed the acceptance." "Yes, you did," I said, leaning close to her. "And do you know what else was in that deed of gift? Sloane? The part you didn't read?" I picked up the document from the box and held it up for the cameras. "This is the deed to Ridgecroft Manor," I announced to the room. My sister, in her greed, just accepted the transfer of the estate into the foundation. I turned to the cameras. "But under the terms of this specific grant, the property is immediately placed into a blind trust. The sole beneficiaries of this trust are the pension fund of the Larkspur Harbor Group employees and the National Maritime Rescue Association." A gasp went through the room. "You gave away the house?" Graham roared as the agents dragged him upright. "That is my house. That is my legacy." "It was never your house, Dad," I said, stepping closer to him. "It belonged to Grandmother, and she left it to me, and now I have given it to the people you tried to rob." I looked at him. He was a small man now, a man in handcuffs, stripped of his dignity, stripped of his power. "You said I was nothing without the name Holmes," I said, reaching out to straighten his crooked tie, just as I had done 1,000 times before business dinners. "I used to think that was true. I used to think the name was the armor." I ended the call. "But then I died," I whispered. "And I found out that the name is just a shell. I am the gut. I am the thing that survived the ocean. And you are just fish food." The agents began to haul him away. He was screaming obscenities, thrashing like a wild animal. Sloane was being led out in her white dress, her mascara running in black streaks down her face. Ethan was standing alone on the stage. He hadn't moved. An agent approached him. Ethan looked at me. He looked at the chaos, and then he did the only thing he could do. He raised his hands and surrendered. He would testify. He would spend years in prison, but he would live. That was the deal. I stood alone on the stage. The flashbulbs were blinding. The questions were being shouted from every direction. "Piper, is it true? Piper, how did you survive? Piper, what happens to the company?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The story was already written. I turned and walked off the stage, past the stunned investors, past the weeping socialites, past the wreckage of my former life. Miles was waiting for me at the side exit. He held the door open. "You did it," he said. He looked exhausted, but he was smiling. "We did it," I corrected. We walked out into the cool night air. The city lights were twinkling below us, indifferent to the drama inside. In the months that followed, the dismantling of the Holmes empire was total. The trial was the sensation of the decade. The video of them dumping my body, unlocked by the password I provided to the prosecution, sealed their fate. Graham received life without parole. Sloane got 20 years. Ethan took a plea deal for 12. Larkspur Harbor Group was restructured. The toxic assets were liquidated. But the core business, the docks, the shipping, was saved by the infusion of capital from the sale of the manor. The employees kept their jobs. The pensions were fully funded. Miles took a job as the chief ethics officer for the new board. He was the guard dog who would make sure no one ever tried to turn the company into a weapon again. As for me, I didn't keep the money. I kept enough to buy a small cottage in a town 3 states away, a place where the coastline is rugged and the tourists are few. I donated the rest. I work as a bookkeeper for a local bakery now. I balance the ledgers. I count the flour sacks. It is quiet work. Honest work. But every evening, I walk down to the cliffs. I sit on the rocks and watch the Atlantic Ocean crash against the shore. Most people look at the ocean and see beauty. Some see danger. I look at the water and I see a teacher. It taught me that you can be submerged and not drown. It taught me that if you hold your breath long enough, the storm will pass. And it taught me that family isn't blood. Family is the people who pull you out of the water, not the ones who push you in. The waves roar, pulling back the stones, scrubbing the beach clean. The sea didn't kill me. It washed me clean of the people who called me family. And for the first time in 30 years, I am finally, truly, alive. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts on Piper's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of justice and survival, please subscribe to Monica Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more listeners. Your support means the world to us.